So, Craig, what about Debra's point that the media trying to marginalize her by focusing on masturbation and witchcraft?
I think it's very true that it was time to scrutinize her because she was on the national stage.
But it's fair scrutiny.
And it's fair scrutiny because she's new on the national stage and these things happen. The problem for the media, as always in these cases, is that her response is, oh, the liberal media. And this is what so often happens. It plays into that narrative for her. Another narrative for her, you mentioned the home foreclosures, trouble paying for college. She talks about how she's not elite. And
she's
she didn't have the money.
Problems, right.
She talked about John Kerry and said, you know, I didn't have to find a place to park my yacht to save on taxes, you know. And so that's her response to those. So it plays into two of her narratives and makes her stronger.
You have set me up with that phrase, liberal media, to play some tape because the morning after her primary victory on Tuesday, she did the network morning shows, and none of the anchors particularly pressed her on the specifics of her record. Then she went on Sean Hannity, and he seemed upset that she had gone to the mainstream media. Let's roll this montage.
Boy, they've said some terrible things about you. You're unelectable, unqualified. Most people thought I'd be sitting here this morning talking to a guy named Mike Castle.
All right, so my question is, why have you decided to subject yourself to what I would argue, probably biased, tough questions, and obviously the advancement of some of the attacks against you?
Well, because I wanted an opportunity to counter those attacks. My opponent is putting out lies. They're being exasperated, or was, and they're being exasperated by the liberal media.
John Avlon, the exasperation aside, I think she meant exacerbated, has now led her, as you alluded to at the top, cancel an appearance this morning on Face the Nation, cancel one on Fox News Sunday as well. So what does that tell you about her view of the media?
Well, it tells you that the campaign is in crisis and containment mode, that they're trying to figure out just how much is out there, because that sort of due diligence wasn't done either by the media or her campaign. But I got to say, you know, what Carl said is right. You know, the idea of playing defense, of playing the victim card, which is one of the narratives that she's going to play when there's accountability for what she has said in the past. People have to be held accountable for what they've said in the past. These are statements of principle, presumably, that she made. And if she put herself out there, and then she made herself into this caricature of a social conservative activist. And now they're in defense mode, but she can't play the victim card. The campaign she ran against Mike Castle, which was ugly and full of smears and innuendo, so much so that I think the media had trouble figuring out how to cover that, because you don't want to advance those smears by addressing them. But then to turn around and play the victim card in the face of the liberal media, well, that doesn't strike me as credible.
Well, it wasn't covered very much because the race was not seen as a competitive race. Debra Saunders, Karl Rove says, look, my job now is to go on Fox and call him as I see him, and that's why he said those things about Christine O'Donnell, although he's now kind of pulled back and at least endorsed her. What did you make of Rush Limbaugh and Michelle Malkin and other conservatives going after Rove for daring to speak his mind about this candidate?
Well, you know, I tuned into some talk radio shows the day after she won, and I kept thinking, boy, they sound like she lost. All they're doing is complaining about the people who criticized her. Obviously, Karl Rove and everybody else has a right to criticize her on fair issues, especially if she hasn't been honest. There are questions about her finances. These are things that Delaware voters would want to know about. I still think, I mean, she's made herself, it's true, the first Facebook Senate candidate, except she's Facebook squared because she's got this YouTube background. And let's face it, this stuff is horrible. But, you know, we didn't get into journalism so that we could just point at people and laugh. We ought to be looking at her record and her positions and what she said about witchcraft 15 years ago. Well, she does have a record of positions. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but she does have positions. She has run before. In fact, there have been stories about her past campaigns. I mean, those seem to me a lot more substantive. This is just prurient.
John Avlon, you want to respond to that?
I just think she has a record, and they're based on all her past statements and in her previous campaigns. So I don't think it's prurient to focus on what she has said in public in the past, especially because she's never held elected office. All she's really been is a professional social conservative activist who's gone on television shows.
Right, and when you say things in front of a camera, obviously that becomes part of the public record. Craig Crawford, whether let's look at the political fallout, whether we're talking about Christine O'Donnell in Delaware or Joe Miller in Alaska or Sharon Angle in Nevada, these people went out and beat establishment candidates, so often with not a lot of money. Shouldn't journalists respect that? Instead, there seems to be, well, there's this mutual antagonism.
Yeah.
We seem to be, some of us, I don't want to include everybody, some of us seem to be looking down our noses at these insurgents, and they don't seem to be big fans of the mainstream media.
Yeah, and I hate to see the mainstream media doing that, because I certainly respect them and their politics, their tactics. They have been very successful. The thing about the Tea Party that strikes me is it's very similar, in particularly their fiscal conservative views, to the Perot movement. And this argument that they're bad for Republicans doesn't wash as much with me, because at least they're inside the Republican Party. And the Perot people were outside the party,
right,
and much more damaging to Republicans.
Craig, just briefly, what about this instant journalistic wisdom when these candidates win, Christine O'Donnell being the latest, that, well, of course it hurts the Republicans because they're all probably going to lose in November, they're too extreme, it's one thing to win, 30,000 votes in Delaware, another thing to win statewide election. We've been wrong all year on some of these races. Could we be wrong
sometimes
again?
we're wrong when we listen too much to the Democratic message. That's the Democratic Party message, that the Tea Party is bad for them. I think we should scrutinize that a bit more, be a little more skeptical of it. The other is that they're all crazy, and that's the trouble with focusing on all these issues, all these statements and everything. We're playing into that Democratic message that these candidates are insane.